Kalani Sitake and the BYU football program made a trio of hires on Monday, completing their defensive staff. What does it look like? And ultimately, how is it all going to go down? We're getting into all of it on a special edition of Locked On Cougars.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. I'm Jake Hatch, 14-year credentialed media member at BYU, your resident expert and insider, as your host here on the show. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. All right, coming up on the special edition, BYU earlier this afternoon announced the hire of 3 coaches, or I guess a hire of 1 coach, and then, reassignment of a couple other coaches to complete their defensive coaching staff ahead of this 2026 football season. And we're going to get into all 3 moves and why I think all 3 of them make sense for Kalani Sitake and the BYU Cougars. So we'll get into all that. First off, let's start off with the move that I think is the most impactful of the bunch, that being the promotion of Chad Kauha'ha'a, most people know him as Chad K, from senior analyst, where he's been in that role for the last 2 seasons for the BYU football program, now to a full-time assistant coach as the outside linebackers and edges coach for Kalani Sitake. Now, Chad K has worked all over the country, mainly in the Western United States, and has proven to be an elite pass rush coach. That's what he was last year as a senior analyst for BYU, was the guy who, if you saw him during practices or during games, he was coaching up guys on how to get after the quarterback. And it's no small reason as to why BYU had their most sack output in terms of 2025 than having a guy like Chad K coaching that unit, because he produced 30 sacks a year ago, the most for BYU since 2015. It had been a solid decade since they had seen that type of production off of the edge. And I think that it absolutely points to what Chad K brings to the table as a pass rush coach. And I know he has the outside linebackers coach, but they also mentioned he'll be working with the edges. Now, I think that also indicates he'll be working pretty heavily with BYU's defensive ends as well. But I think that this is a net positive move for the BYU football program, because all he's done is make BYU's pass rush that much better. Now, obviously, talent has a part to do with it, and I think the move to making him a full-time assistant coach is so that he can go out there and recruit the guys he believes that can elevate BYU's pass rush to another level or 2, hopefully, as members of the Big 12 Conference. I think this is a major move, because Chad is considered to be an ace recruiter in many respects. You lost some of that with Jernaro Gilford and Jay Hill leaving BYU staff and moving on to Michigan. Well, I think Chad K brings a lot of that energy. He recruits Hawaii as well as anybody, being a native of Maui, Hawaii. And obviously, he's got cachet all over the country, having worked at every level of football, high school, the G5 ranks, the Power 4 ranks. He brings it all to the table. And as I mentioned, you don't get much better than having a guy who can prove that since he joined BYU staff, their pass rush has improved by leaps and bounds. And that's why I think Chad K is a major pickup for the BYU football program. Not pickup, I guess a promotion, I should say, moving from analyst to a full-time assistant coach. Now, the other inside the program move is that of Justin Ena moving from linebackers coach to full-time special teams coordinator. Now, this is an interesting move, because Justin, I think, did a very good job coaching BYU's linebackers. But I think we all saw some of the weakness of BYU special teams a year ago. And I think with the move of Kelly Poppinga from special teams coordinator to full-time defensive coordinator, I think this was a prudent move, because I think a full-time assistant having his eyes on this facet of the game can make BYU special teams the strength it was in 2024. I'm not saying there was a clear weakness in 2025, but there were moments it absolutely hurt BYU's chances. And I think having a guy like Justin Ena, who has been a special teams coordinator during his time at Utah and other stops in his coaching career, I think that could improve BYU's odds in that third phase of the game that Kalani Sitake wants in terms of playing complementary football. So I hope it works out that Justin Ena having full-time dedication to the special teams, working with BYU's kickers, punters, obviously looking at coverage units, return, all of that. Hopefully he can find some of those little tweaks and those little margins that you can pick up yards, extra points in terms of punt returns, all the different things that go into special teams, because it's a phase of the game that I think far too often gets neglected, but we have seen in 2024 how big of a strength it can be for BYU, and then 2025 when it can be a bit of a hindrance. And I think that this move, putting Justin Ena in that position full-time, should yield benefits for the BYU football program. Now, the final move is the most interesting one to me. BYU is hiring a cornerbacks coach after they just hired a cornerbacks coach. Okay, understand that Demario Warren obviously is going to be moving positions, but Lewis Walker, who is he? What does he bring to the BYU football program? We'll get into that next as we continue on in the special edition of Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and you all know that FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it all with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. If you're riding with the favorites, speaking of the Seattle Seahawks, riding with the underdog in the New England Patriots, or you're just going to build a one-game, same-game parlay, this is the game that everyone has been waiting for. It's where the predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels like it's bigger than you might imagine. It's the perfect way to cap off the season and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to the final whistle. So if you're a new customer right now with FanDuel, you can bet just $5 and get $200 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Bet just $5, get $200 in bonus bets. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the football season is over. One last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Thank you once again for making it Locked On, the number one sports podcast network out there. And obviously, a big thank you to all of you for subscribing, rating, reviewing, sharing this with your family and friends. If you want to take it to the next level, join the Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club. Go to lockedoncougars.supercast.com. Get a bevy of different features available to you exclusively as a member of the Everydayer Club. Once again, that's lockedoncougars.supercast.com. All right. Whoa, just screwed that. The wrong button. That's never happened before in the history of the show, I don't think. But nonetheless, replaying the open, as you might imagine. But the move by BYU to complete their coaching staff on Monday was the hire of Lewis Walker as their new cornerbacks coach. Now, some of you are wondering, Jake, they just hired a cornerbacks coach in Demario Warren. Yes, Demario was originally hired as passing game coordinator as well as cornerbacks coach. But with this move to hire Lewis Walker, Demario will retain that passing game coordinator title, but he will move to working with BYU safety. So he'll be coaching up guys like Raider Dumuni and Falatau Satuala, Tommy Prasis, and the rest of BYU's really star-studded cast of safeties. I think it's a pretty savvy move there to put a veteran voice with that unit. And then with BYU's cornerbacks, guys like Trey Alexander and Evan Johnson, obviously looking to take the next step, they bring in Lewis Walker. Now, Lewis, you look at his background, he's got 11 years of coaching experience, having coached at the FCS level, mainly at Monmouth, as well as North Dakota State, two pretty good programs. In the case of North Dakota State, one of the Leviathans of FCS football. And he's also had other stops along his path. But what he brings to BYU is he's a relatively young coach, even though he's got a decades plus experience at the FCS level. And also, he's a Utah native. He played at Hawaii for a couple of seasons, then transferred to Utah, where he played for Kalani Sitake as a member of the Utah football program in 2011 and 2012. And I think what Lewis Walker brings to the table here for the BYU football program is he brings a want to, because he has bided his time. Very few guys grind it out at the FCS level as long as he has. And yes, he's had great success. Monmouth had 3 playoff appearances during his time with Monmouth. He also has had great success coaching at North Dakota State. Funny enough, he had just left Monmouth to join North Dakota State again before deciding to come to BYU. He actually joined them, I think, in late December. So since he spent a month and change working in Fargo once again before making the jump here to Provo. Kalani Sitake is a great judge of coaching talent. I don't think I have to say that to anybody other than to point to what he's done during his time at BYU. Has he had his weaknesses in terms of hiring friends that ultimately he had to move on from? Yes. But I think when he's had to make moves, when his back's been against the wall, to use that expression, he has found very, very solid coaches. And if he trusts Lewis Walker to come in and BYU's replacement for Jernaro Gilford, who am I to argue with it? Because once upon a time, Jernaro, when he came to BYU, remember his only experience was the FCS level, coaching at Southern Utah as well. And now Jernaro was a BYU alum and added that element. But I think the fact that Lewis Walker, having played at Judge Memorial High School in Utah, obviously grew up in this state, understands what the dynamics are all about, and he's going to be ultra motivated making the leap from the FCS to the Power 4 level. He bypassed having to go to the G6 level, etc. He gets that elevator all the way to the P4 level right away. You can guarantee he's going to be ultra motivated to get it right with the BYU football program and make sure that he obviously earns his keep as an assistant coach for Kalani Sitake. So I like this hire. I think it's a savvy hire. I'll be honest, I've been kind of waiting to see who BYU is going to hire as their other defensive coach. And I did wonder at one point, maybe Jernaro Warren ends up as BYU's full-time, like just defensive backs coach. He takes both corners and safeties and just does it as a passing game coordinator. And maybe they reallocate that position elsewhere, maybe back to offense or something like that with a full-time quarterbacks coach or the like. But obviously that never came to fruition. And Lewis Walker is the guy tabbed to lead BYU's cornerbacks unit. The nice part is he steps into a unit that's got top-line talent. Evan Johnson and Trey Alexander, they are absolutely NFL caliber cornerbacks. The question is, will he be able to develop talent much like Jernaro Gilford did at BYU and make the next crop of cornerbacks as good as the previous crop was? That's the big question to be answered here, because this defense that Kalani Sitake and Kelly Poppinga as well as Gary Anderson deploy, it relies upon corners who can hold their own in man coverage, obviously, and hold up in terms of just being the linchpins that make a lot of this front seven capable of getting after the opposing quarterback, because you can trust that these cornerbacks are going to hold up on the back end. So Lewis Walker, he's got his work cut out for him, but I trust that Kalani Sitake knows what he's doing here, and he wouldn't make this hire just because he needed to hire somebody. That's not Kalani's style. He's been very meticulous, at least in the last 5 or so years. When it comes to hiring new people to his staff, he vets them very, very closely. Yes, he does prioritize guys that I think he knows, and a guy like Lewis Walker, having played for him, obviously will have that connection. But I think Kalani knows what he's doing. He's on the benefit of the doubt with some of the hires he's made recently, particularly in the last 5 or so years on this staff. And I think Lewis Walker is going to prove to be a pretty savvy hire in time if everything goes according to what I think Kalani Sitake has in mind for this defensive staff. So full staff is finally out now, and I'll just lay it out for you guys. Actually, maybe I can share this here so you guys can see it up on the big screen here. But we have the final layout of BYU staff, and that is officially, I'm going to share this as I go along with it, defensive coordinator as well as an inside linebackers coach will be Kelly Poppinga, obviously taking over as BYU's DC, but he'll take on that extra role as BYU's inside linebackers coach. He'll be working with guys like Siale Esera. Now, defensive line and associate head coach go to Siale Esera. But I mentioned earlier that I think that Chad Kauha'ha'a as the outside linebackers coach. Also mentioned he's going to work with edges. That means he's probably working with defensive ends as well as the outside linebackers. And that, I think, is kind of a split position. Maybe they should have called him the edges coach versus outside linebackers, but it's a bit of semantics at that point. Cornerbacks, Lewis Walker, obviously, and then safeties / defensive passing game coordinator will go to Jernaro Warren, with Justin Ena taking over full-time as the special teams coordinator. So I think this is a savvy move by BYU overall to make these hires, and wish them the best of luck, because obviously there's a lot of pressure on this BYU football program going into 2026. They went 23-4 the past 2 years. They've been knocking on the door of that college football playoff. They want nothing more than to break down said door and be a part of that playoff. And we'll see how it all shakes out later on this fall. But there you go. Kalani Sitake's got his staff intact. What do you think? Are you pleased with the hires? You think they could have done better? What would you have done different? Let us know in the comments, or reach out via social media or via email even, and let us know what you think of these hires. We'll have more for you guys on our next full edition of the podcast coming up tomorrow, with probably a few less gaffes in it. But as always, thank you for your continued support of the podcast. Please continue to subscribe, rate and review it, share it with your family and friends. And if so inclined, join the Locked On Cougars Everydayer Club by going to lockedoncougars.supercast.com. All right, coming up next, if those of you watching this on YouTube, you're going to go to our full-time 24/7 YouTube channel. And those of you listening on audio, go check out Locked On College Football or Locked On Big 12 as your next listen if you haven't done so already today. And as always, come back tomorrow bright and early and be an everydayer right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.